So we all agree that Ned Fulmer is the epitome of a mediocre white man, right? Hello everyone and welcome back to The Chanel. Ned Fulmer just posted a video addressing the backlash that he received from the podcast he did with his ex-wife, Ariel. This new podcast is called Rock Bottom, and Ned Fulmer is trying to do this rebrand 3 years after he was exposed for cheating on his wife with his employee. Now, I do want to preface this video with saying the audience actually isn't privy to all the years of therapy that him and his ex-wife Ariel did. And so for us, it's almost as if time stood still. While in reality, since both of them took a 3-year break, they were actually working on repairing their relationship, whether romantic or platonic, to get along better as they do share 2 children together. So about a month ago, Ned Fulmer released the first episode of his new podcast, and he says that this podcast is going to be a space for him to host people who have reached their rock bottom, especially in the public eye. And he wants this to be a space where they can converse about what that situation was like and what they learned from it, and for them to reflect and move on from their past. Well, the first episode that he released was with his wife, Ariel, or rather his ex-wife now. And in this podcast episode, they are basically talking about what has happened within these past 3 years, what their relationship is like now, and what they see themselves doing as far as content in the future. Well, people had a lot to say after this podcast dropped. And most of that was due to his approach to the podcast and the questions that he was asking Ariel. A lot of people felt some type of way because some people felt that he was profiting off of Ariel's trauma from the public cheating scandal. And others also felt that Ariel should have just not been on the podcast at all. And a lot of them expressed disappointment that she had agreed to do the podcast. Now, I don't feel either way about it. I think that Ariel and Ned probably know the best what makes sense for them moving forward. And if this podcast was the way for them to begin moving on, especially within the public eye, then I'm all for it. The other thing to consider is that they do have 2 kids together, and it's very important that they do have some sort of respectful relationship despite everything that had happened, which I know is something that's probably very, very painful for Ariel. A lot of people felt like she was forgiving him too easily, or that she shouldn't even talk to him ever again, but I think people are forgetting the fact that they do have to have some sort of relationship in order for them to co-parent efficiently and for their kids to be healthy and happy. So I thought we could just go through some of the highlights of this podcast episode, because I really do feel like maybe Ned should have prepared a little bit more before going into this. It kind of just felt like he threw all of this together because his questions weren't very insightful, and the way that he approached the topic about his affair, it was almost like he was tiptoeing around it without actually mentioning what he did. Okay, so right off the bat, something to note is the vocal fry in this whole podcast from Ned is absolutely horrible to listen to. It's really like nails on a chalkboard for me. And to be honest, it was pretty distracting and hard to get through the podcast because of the vocal fry. Second, in his opening statement, he fails to mention that the person he cheated on with wasn't just his producer, it was also his employee. Naturally, this is a huge issue because already there is a huge power imbalance. Ned, who is a founder of the company Try Guys, was cheating with his employee. He does make a point to mention that this relationship was consensual. I don't know how meaningful that consent can be if that person is the same person who goes to you to sign their paychecks. This is the reason that this is a huge HR violation in probably all companies, because there is a very clear power imbalance and could lead to people being exploited. The other thing he says is that the whole affair became a massive public scandal, and he also mentions that he was disappointed that all of it had to go public. However, he and Alex are the very reason the affair was so public. They were caught openly cheating in public, going out to dinners together, they were making out at the club, they were at a Harry Styles concert together, and viewers saw them in public, reported it to Alex's fiance at the time, and to Ariel, and also shared it on subreddits. So obviously it did become very public, but that is because Ned and Alex were not doing anything to be discreet. And the most unfortunate thing about this is that Ariel found out about this affair. The viewers were the ones who messaged her and sent pictures of Alex and Ned together. And this is just a horrible way to find out that your partner is cheating on you. Ned and Alex had absolutely no regard for their partner's feelings, and they obviously didn't think of the consequences, of course, because they were cheating in the first place. But doing so publicly was even more painful and irresponsible, and I'm sure made all of this a million times worse for their respective partners. Another thing about Ned's intro to this episode is that he keeps referring to the affair as a mistake. And I take huge issue with that because no, it was not a mistake. Ned made an active choice to cheat on his wife, and not only did he do it once, he did it for over a full year. So no, that is not a mistake at all. That is a poor choice. Yes, you can regret it. Yes, you can be very sorry for it. But let's be very clear, it is not a mistake. It was a choice. The other thing that's so infuriating about this is that Ned was known as the wife guy. He always referred to his wife in the Try Guys videos. Eugene, Keith, and Zach all had their own unique personalities, but Ned didn't really have a personality. His only personality was that he was married and had a wife. He would make sure to mention his wife in every video, but I do want to note that he never ever referred to his wife by name. He always said my wife instead of Ariel, even though the viewers definitely knew who Ariel was and her name because she was part of some of the Try Guys content and participated in the podcasts with the other Try Guys wives. Anyway, this whole intro is so stupid. And to me, it was definitely a red flag that he did this intro alone without Ariel. Because without Ariel present, it felt like he could say whatever he wanted to in the way that he wanted to downplay his behaviors. At one point in the podcast, Ariel mentions that she absolutely does not forgive Ned. And Ned's response to this is that it's hard to hear. Which, yes, I can understand that it is hard to hear, but it just felt like a weird response because it almost feels like he's prioritizing his own feelings over what he had done to his wife and the trauma that it caused her. Another thing that makes this whole podcast weird is that Ned is the one who is facilitating the conversation. He is the one who came prepared with the questions to interview Ariel. And in my opinion, I feel like it would have been a lot more productive to have a third party there to facilitate the conversation because some of the questions that Ned was asking, it almost felt like he was not the person who betrayed Ariel. For instance, at one point, he asks Ariel how it felt for the whole scandal to be public. He further elaborates and asks, did it make things easier or did it make things harder? What the did you think she would say? In what world would it have been easier for all of this to be public? You were the one who cheated on your wife, and for you to ask how it felt is just so bizarre. The way he asks questions is almost like he's externalizing himself, as if he is not the one who inflicted this pain and was the one who did all of these things and is responsible for the pain that Ariel experienced. At one point, Ned goes on to explain the reason that he wanted to do this podcast because he wanted to interview people to redeem their public image. Ariel, in response to this, says, do you really think you're interesting enough for that? And y'all, that took me the heck out. There's also a point in the podcast where Ariel describes how she found out, and She found out because a viewer had sent her a photo of Ned and Alex together. And Ariel explains that in this moment, she literally could not see what was right in front of her. And to her, she processed it and thought that the other person in the photo wasn't Alex, but Ned's sister, Grace. The photo was taken at a time where Ned and Alex were both in New York for work. And Ariel had joined Ned a little bit later in New York. And as they were in the car together, she asks him why Grace was in New York as well. And then she describes looking over and seeing his face completely drop, and he just ended up confessing to everything. Well, Ned then explains that he doesn't remember it that way, and so Ariel asks how he does remember it, and Ned, the way he describes it is so weird. He says, well, you were asking me a couple questions, and when I had answered in such a way that you knew, that's how I remember the moment playing out. The way he tiptoes around saying that he cheated is just crazy to me. We all know what you did, and it almost feels like he does not want to accept that responsibility. He just wants to brush it under the rug, and he's allergic to confessing what he did. Because again, if you remember, he describes this as a mistake, not a poor choice that he made. He then goes on to describe what he had felt in that moment. He said that at that moment that he saw Ariel's face, he suddenly had this realization that, oh, I have been hurting this person that I love. So you're telling me that you didn't realize that you were hurting this person that you love for over a full year? I just cannot imagine being married to a person, cheating on them, and then coming back home, sleeping at night in the same bed, and keeping up this charade for an entire year. I don't even know that I would be able to look at my partner if I did something like that, and I definitely know I would not be able to look at my children. And of course, Ariel's response to him saying that he had a realization in that moment was, so you didn't realize until that moment? And he says, well, no, I did know that what I was doing would hurt you, but you don't really realize it or let it sink in. And rightfully so, Ariel's response to this is, that's interesting. And on her face, you can tell she's completely baffled and pissed off at this response because what the actual... There's also a moment in the podcast where Ned describes his reasoning for betraying his wife. And he says that he felt pigeonholed in his role as part of the Try Guys and didn't like being just the wife guy. But what's crazy about that response is that he was the one who kept bringing up his wife that way. He was the one who perpetuated this character of the wife guy. And so now he's explaining it as if the audience and the other Try Guys were pigeonholing him into this role, when actually, in reality, Ned was the whole reason that the wife guy role existed. I don't think anyone was really asking him to do that. He just chose to do it. So I guess you could say he pigeonholed himself, but I think that's just such a lame excuse. And this part of the podcast was really sad. Ariel was describing their life together before the whole affair, and she explains that they grew up together pretty much because they got married pretty young and had spent so much life together growing and learning, and Ariel felt like she was living this happily ever after dream. And for Ned to betray her in this way, it really just felt like her entire world shattered and she couldn't trust anyone again, which is completely understandable. I'm so baffled by Ned's behavior. For me, I cannot fathom cheating on a partner, especially for as long as he did. Well, overall, the public's reaction to watching this episode was obviously very poor. People were ripping him apart in the comments. And to me, it just felt like he didn't prepare himself enough to come up with answers that were well thought out. And he made himself look like a fool and completely self-centered. So Ned released a new video today titled Responding to the Backlash. And in this video, he spends so much time harping on 15-second TikTok clips and how people are making assumptions just based off of snippets of the conversation. That's just completely laughable because it wasn't just 15-second clips that made you look bad. It was the whole hour-long conversation that made you look like a fool. He also comes off as a little defensive because he explains that the viewers, they don't know exactly what has gone on between Ariel and him in these past 3 years. Which, yes, he has a point there, but I don't think that's the point that you should be focusing on right now. Well, anyway, after the podcast with Ariel dropped, his viewership went down dramatically. I think the last time I saw his channel for the Rock Bottom podcast, the most recent video only received around 2K views. And to put that into perspective, the one with Ariel had over 1 million views. So clearly people weren't watching for Ned. They were there mainly to support Ariel. And a lot of the comments under that episode said that they were only there for Ariel. I am glad to see that it seems like Ned and Ariel are able to co-parent very well. They do describe that they go on family vacations together still and describe themselves as a family because they do have kids together, and because of that, they are bonded for life. So for the sake of the kids and for the sake of Ariel, I'm just glad that they seem to be able to communicate with one another and that they continue to go to therapy and work on their relationship, keeping their kids at the center. Well, that's all that I have to say. In my opinion, Ned is the epitome of a mediocre white man because his whole personality was just wife guy when he was part of Try Guys, and that made him very famous, when in reality he is just a mediocre white guy. Alrighty, so that's it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I hope I'll see y'all next time.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!